Yo.
I'm not gonna take. I'm gonna take my shot after we debate.
Okay, bro. Restart the recording. Okay.
I'm already gonna
Now for
show
the
these
record.
niggas LOL.
Let me ping real quick. 1 sec.
This shit was corny as hell.
Okay.
Wow, Regulus, bro. Nigga, Regulus switched up.
With a fucking
Doesn't
bias, but
fucking-
of course it's British people, bro.
Like, thought Regulus was on the other side.
Oh, he's here. Okay, so where do you want to
He's
start?
lucky.
Do
Okay.
you want to start now?
Look, Sakazuki's opinion.
Okay. Oh yeah, add the rec bot.
All right. By the way, I'm gonna start with an opening statement. Do you guys have an opening statement?
Wait, shut the fuck up. You can start whatever you want. But look, so for the recording, the topic is going to be veganism. They're going to be defending veganism, apparently. And the debaters are going to be me, Archie, versus Gizbob and Yani. The wager being, if we lose, we have to give them 4 premium nitros. If they lose, which is obviously going to occur, they have to give us 2 premium nitros. The judge, the immediate judge specifically, is Sakazuki. The official judge is Void. He's going to watch the recording. So what's your opening for veganism?
Wait, excuse me, real quick. And in case, we get the hypothetical goal that grows legs and runs away, right? We have to establish them. Me and Infinity are going to be critiquing this view, and seemingly you're going to be interrogating us. Okay?
When it comes to our
I'm not
critiques,
sure
but
about
also
that,
you're going to
but
be defending. Oh no, also you're going to be defending veganism, obviously. So you're going to have to give an argument for veganism. We're going to be critiquing
Wait.
We're
I'll give
waiting.
motivations for veganism.
When you say
And I'll give like
motivation, what
something
does that
that's gonna
mean?
motivate
Evidential
veganism. So
motivation or
wait,
motivation
hold
in a
on.
sense where
I'm not done there. I'm not
that's
done
fine.
there.
I wasn't done either.
I'm not okay. I'm gonna keep speaking then. So the
But that's
You're
opening
fine.
fine with
I'm
statement.
talking?
speaking as
That's
well.
fine.
I
Okay.
take
Can we please
veganism,
have
or I
moderation?
take ethical
Yeah.
veganism
Can
to
someone
be
mute Yanni?
all forms of
Yeah, can
animal
we please have
exploitation and
moderation?
cruelty.
Okay,
Because
are we-
he's giving an
I-
opening statement.
Look, you're speaking over me.
Well, no, you're speaking over.
Okay, so we're going one at a time on each team. All right, I'm gonna keep one person muted for each team. So I'm gonna need y'all to first agree who's speaking first for both teams, and then 2, just like Infinity and Archie, since y'all were speaking first, give y'all's opening statement if you have one. But I think y'all said you're critiquing his view anyway. Probably let Yanni give his opening statement, and y'all can go from there because you established the wager, the judge, everything. So
I just want to clarify. It's not the case that I'm giving an opening statement, but rather just clarification. Also on me, Archie, because it's going to be a question towards him. He's the one that chose the topic with them. I wasn't here. Look, me and Archie are good enough to do any topic, so I'm fine with any topic. Archie, so is it the case that they're going to be defending veganism in a sense where they give an argument, we're going to critique it, correct?
This is correct. And in fact, just in case that, there's any confusion for some reason, any of us have amnesia, here's the clarification in chat. This is specifically what I typed to them when both Gizbob and Yanni agreed to doing this topic. So we are, again, we're just to clarify, we're just okay with eating, obviously non-humans in some context.
Yeah.
That's pretty much it. And then these people are going to be providing a critique to that, and we'll be critiquing them. Okay.
Okay. All right. Go ahead, bitch.
Okay, so yeah. So the
wait, 1 sec. Who's speaking for Yanni and
Me.
Archie and
not
Archie
just-
Infinity?
If we not
Me.
do this like mute shit, like we're not going to speak at the same time in a sense
Y'all
where we're not going to talk with each other.
I mean, y'all just did, but like
We're not
Not
going to
really.
do it again.
Yanni. Okay, I'm gonna ask Yanni and Gizbob. Do you guys want it to be one at a time, or do you guys want it to be 2? Like, just everyone can speak.
Whatever Gizbob's fine with, I'm fine with.
Gizbob.
I'm really fine either way. I think one at a time will make it a lot easier for
All right.
both sides to actually have effective communication.
All right, so we can start with, if you're fine with either, we can start with 2v2. If it gets to be like, we're gonna go to 1-on-1. All right, cool. Yanni, go.
Okay, yeah. So, first off, I'll just start off with defining veganism. So, my view is ethical veganism, which is simply the view that all forms of animal exploitation and cruelty are prima facie, upon first impression, morally wrong and should be avoided. And the motivation for this view is, well, starting off, it seems to be the case that, societally, we hold this strong intuition that eating and murdering and enslaving humans seems to be seriously morally wrong. And then, obviously, now we look towards animals. And then I'm thinking, well, okay, I start introspecting it. I'm thinking, what's the distinction morally between humans and animals such that I can, kill and enslave animals, but I can't do the same towards humans. And I haven't been able to find that. It doesn't seem to me that there is such distinction.
Okay, that's a cool seeming. What else?
That's the opening okay. Look, so there's going to be a couple clear questions. One, what's the argument for the intuition there? Secondly, look, why can we not just have the self-interest to not win this the enslavement of another human or the torture of another human, but not hold that self-interest towards, for example, an animal. Thirdly, I don't care about your seeming. It's just the case that you're making a claim about consistent intuition in which you cannot back up. That's just a random claim in which you're probably going to go circular on, like every other fucking vegan does, bro. So I'm going to ask once again, just for clarity, and Archie, you can finish after I'm done. What's the argument as to why we do not possess a self-interest in which is compatible with other humans, but is incompatible with the preservation of life, the preservation of quote unquote non-slavery, and all these other things when it comes to animals? Go ahead.
Right.
Okay.
Also,
I'm sorry, I
excuse
don't
me, you
think we
said
were
I was
done.
gonna exactly like you said I was going to go after. That's your first blunder of this debate, your second one of the stage. Now, previously you said all forms of animal or human cruelty is bad, right? And that we know this via prima facie, that this is something that we could just by surface value understand as a human society. I want you to explain and prove, or at least give some motivation to why we should believe all forms of human cruelty is bad prima facie. And you also made this interesting statement. You said word for word, quote, "We hold this view that enslaving humans are morally wrong as a society," and has you introspected it and asked the question, what is the distinction? Why exactly do we think it's okay to, obviously harm animals but not harm humans? Unquote. Obviously, if this is the case, this holds some interesting implications. It implies that not only should we value your introspection, but it also implies that you haven't yet found a distinction. So does this mean if we offer this distinction in any way meaningful or not, at least to you, but if we offer any distinction at all, does this mean you would be willing to concede this position? Or do you have some other outlining motivation that you've just yet to actually give because you didn't formulate this argument properly?
Are you guys done?
Yeah.
Well, we're probably done speaking considering the fact that there was like a 3 second interval there, but
I
go
mean,
ahead.
you're Infinity, you never know. So, yeah,
That shit was
the
ass.
first insane question that Infinity asked me was justify the fact that societally we have the intuition that eating humans is immoral.
That wasn't the
And
question.
that was, wait, why is he speaking over me? I thought it was like turn by turn. What's he doing?
But you thought wrong.
Oh, okay, I guess I was wrong. But yeah, Infinity asked me to justify this intuition existing, the societal intuition. So it seems to be the case that at least Infinity doesn't have this intuition. Infinity doesn't have the intuition that tells him eating other humans is something that's not morally reprehensible. It doesn't have the intuition that tells him being cruel, and enslaving other humans isn't something that's morally reprehensible. But the vast majority of the people in the audience do. So just from a case, just from the sample size, we can say that, okay, at the very least, from the people within the
Sorry, my
audience,
my
who
headset cut
should.
out. You said what intuition do you
Nah,
believe he doesn't
I
have?
don't care if he had took out, to be honest.
That's kind of rude. It's okay. You can continue.
Yeah, so at least from the sample size of the people in the audience, we can conclude that people generally have this intuition towards people having the obligation to not eat humans and not carry out mass slaughter or carry out exploitation upon humans. Number two, you mentioned self-interest. I don't see the moral relevance of self-interest. Why is self-interest something that I should care about morally? And number three, for introspection, well, this is a point more so towards Archie, but I guess it attacks Infinity's last point as well. For the point of introspection, we use introspection, all of us individually and as a collective, to come to conclusions all the time, right? So, for example, when I'm evaluating, in fact, when you're evaluating your own existence, you use introspection, to come to the conclusion that you exist. Whenever you do anything, most of the case, it seems to me anyway, or it seems to be the case that we all use introspection. Gizbob, do you have anything to add?
No,
Wait,
that
wait, wait.
basically
Also,
covers
also,
it. There
also, wait,
was
hold on.
not.
Wait, one more thing as well, Archie. You mentioned bringing up any distinction. I think the distinction should be morally relevant, as I specified as well. But yeah, go ahead. Gizbob.
Yeah, no, that's basically it. They didn't provide a single argument of value, not once throughout the 30 different things that they said. So they can go ahead and continue.
Wonderful. Actually, I'll respond initially to
Wait,
this point.
let me respond first. I don't know if Gizbob is here
You
for
got it.
aesthetic or something, but look, oh my god, just let Yanni do all the work, brother. Just stay in the background. But let me clarify, retard. One, you don't know anything about philosophy of statistics, so let me just clarify this. You cannot use data sample in which is seemingly biased. So if it's the case that you're using the crowd as a data size or a data sample, I'm just going to question the validity of the crowd, specifically since I have a reason to believe that they're biased, even independent of the reason that I possess for their biasness. Just justify that the crowd is going to be a large enough sample size at that to infer any type of induction or reasonability towards the point. Additionally, since you were trying to rat, I was asking for the argument for the intuition there. If you didn't know what I mean or what I meant, you could have just asked for clarification. Simply what I meant was what's the argument as to why intuition is going to be a justification, not a motivation, but a justification for moral propositions? And let me clarify, since low tiers like you conflate the two terms. Justification and motivation are two different things. Now, look, I have more to add, Archie, but I can add it at the end so they don't fail to track it this time. Would you like that, or would you like me to just continue real quick?
I mean, I like that just fine. I think we could keep it there. And also, just one more comment to add. So you seemingly made the specification that we're looking for morally relevant distinctions, or at least distinctions that would appear so to us. So we may have different interpretations of what would be morally relevant in this instance. What do you consider a morally relevant distinction here?
Look, and before you answer the question, I'm just gonna finish real quick. When it comes to the self-interest, I don't care about you saying you seemingly have no reason to posit or morally consider as a determination for morality self-interest. Well, that's completely fine. The question was, why shouldn't we use this determination? The question wasn't the following. Well, this determination is true, therefore why shouldn't we use it? So I'm going to repeat it again for the judge, the media judge at that being Sakazuki. The question was the following. What's wrong with just using this determination being self-interest when it comes to morality, rather than going by this random metric which seems to have holes? Because when we argue for seemings, at least on your end, well, it seems to be the case that X doesn't follow, therefore I'm Y position. I don't see why that's a valid reason to be Y position. I don't see that at all. It seems to be that due to your lack of seemings for one side, you can just be agnostic, which is completely fine. Or you can be motivated off of your lack of seemings, if you have more seemings for Y side, to be Y side or to be a part of Y side. But like I said, motivation isn't justification. You're motivated by justification, but that's not an identity relationship. That's a causal relationship there.
Right. Also, another thing to add that I forgot to respond to, you also made a response. You said that we use introspection as a tool to evaluate forms of existence and events. At least that's my paraphrasing of what you meant to say, because what you said was retarded. And that it seems we all use introspection, at least to examine the world around us and the nature of reality. And this is true. But the question, or at least the critique here, isn't that you're using introspection. I'm just concerned with why your personal introspection should be valued. Why
And then
would we care about
additionally,
yours?
a method that we use is not just introspection, but rather it's introspection paired with priors. So that would even be true if I were to grant your point. But
Exactly.
also, look, when you say intuition, although you completely miscommunicated my point to the audience for some type of rhetorical upscale or something like that, which obviously failed. The entire point is I wanted an argument as to why, and I'm going to clarify this again. I wanted an argument as to why intuition is justification, not motivation, but justification for moral propositions, especially since even then, if I were to grant your point, we just intuitively, and I hope you don't rat and disagree with this, it just seems to be the case that we intuitively possess a distinction between humans and animals, even if there's a lack of an ability to point it out. It's just intuitively the case that we point a distinction between the two out. Or we possess a distinction.
Are you guys fucking finished again?
Nice one,
I'm
anyway.
sorry, there was a stutter there.
Nah, my mic cut out. Yo, Gizmo,
No,
do you
you
have
just
anything to
stuttered.
say before I speak? Or
Oh, you have
No,
to.
you can go ahead and I'll add on after if you miss
Yeah, just let your
anything.
dad speak. We understand. Go ahead, Yani.
Yo, oh my God. See is up
yeah,
in the
okay. Yeah. So for the point regarding the intuitions, it's not my fault that you can't convey your argument or your responses clearly to the audience and to me, right? But it's perfectly fine. We'll like move along with the hedge and like we'll allow you to hedge your position. So it seems to be the case that we can trust our moral intuitions because our intuitions guide us or seem to correspond with traits that we find morally valuable. So, for example, or like things that we find morally reprehensible as well. So, for example, we have moral intuitions against rape, murder, like arson, and all these kinds of like obscene moral acts. And we also have intuitions that point us towards, what kinds of moral traits that we find valuable. So that's one reason why we should trust intuition. Number two, I'm not sure what you take justification to be, but what I take justification to be is any fact that counts in favor of a proposition. So I need you to explain why the reasons I gave earlier aren't facts that count in favor towards the proposition that I'm arguing for in the debate. And then number three, with the sample size being biased, um, do you disagree with the fact that these beliefs regarding regarding it being immoral to eat people and enslave people are beliefs that are held widespread within society? I mean, it's something that we can see within religion. It's something that we can see within law and whatnot. And people tend to have these intuitions that corresponds with these facts. regarding the law and fucking religion and whatnot. So like the beliefs that I'm describing when I say people have intuitions regarding not eating and exploiting people and being cruel towards people, these seem to be beliefs and intuitions that are held widespread within society. And then number two, number four actually. So I'm sorry. Regarding the introspection point, um, I already explained to you as to why introspection would be something that is valuable or does justify my position. So again, justification is any fact that counts in favor of a position, right? And then obviously we introspect to find facts, and then those facts tend to count in favor of propositions, right? So I already gave you the example regarding existence, and also you completely confused what introspection was. So you don't use introspection to examine the world. You use introspection. It's like, okay, like you examine your own beliefs and you come towards conclusions regarding that. And then, Gizbob, do you have anything to add before I
Oh
like
yeah,
take a
and
breather?
you said there were intuitions pointing in favor of humans having greater moral value than animals, generally speaking. Even if you cannot outline why, I was going to ask for what these intuitions would be. If you could present any sort of thought experiment that demonstrates these intuition, those sorts of things, so we could interact with it.
Sure. So just to respond really quick to what he said, in regards to your intuition point, I'll address that because that was the weakest one you actually made. You understand, yeah, it could be the case that our intuitions sometimes, in some instances, seem to lead
Bitch, can
us
I be
from your
unmuted?
perspective.
My bad.
Oh, was he muted? Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is very retarded for a few reasons. I mean, I'd argue that it's very circular in context to what the question was, and that was supposed to be an answer to our question of why we can trust these things. I mean, you said we can trust them because they lead us in the right direction, but how do we know they lead us in the right direction? Because we trust them, right? This is very circular. We trust them because they lead us rightly, and we know they lead us rightly because we trust them. There doesn't seem to be any independent justification for why these
Also,
intuitions are trustworthy, other than the claim that they are. There's a very huge ambiguity in trust us. Who is being trusted, right?
yeah.
Us? Is this to suppose that we all has a set, agree to some singular set of intuitions?
Wait,
I don't think
Archie,
that's the
did you hear
case.
the thing that he said at
Good?
the look,
No, I
Gizbob,
did. I
just
was going to
stay in the
respond.
background.
Good.
Gizbob, stay in the this nigga just asked me for a thought experiment as to why there is cases, or it just seems to be the case that humans possess an intuition
Yes,
in which
could
they
you
do not
relate
share.
to
I'm
me a
sorry, can y'all please mute him? I
hypothetical in
don't think I
which
was
this is the
done.
case?
I'm sorry, can y'all please mute him? I'm going to dismiss the argument he gave, Boyd. Repeating, I'm going to dismiss the argument he gave under his breath to try to sneak something in. But he just asked, because he knew he was going to rhetorically look bad there, which is why he tried to interrupt. He just asked for a case or a test experiment to interact with in which humans possess the intuition in which does not morally consider animals the same as themselves. Look, that's just trivially true. It's just the case that we would rather eat animals, which we do, over eating humans. So even if there is no at least morally relevant distinction, there's some type of distinction which exists in which, and I'm going to clarify, this is not an argument towards veganism, but rather this is just a motivation for Gizbob's view, at least. There's the second form of motivation because the first one I already gave. The second point is just going to be the case that there's obviously some distinction that we have when it comes to a human and an animals because we eat humans, or I apologize, we eat animals, but we don't eat humans. But look, there was no hedge. The question that I asked was, what was the argument for the intuition there? You just didn't understand the question. Why? Because there was a lack of clarity, which is why you should ask questions. It's not due to a lack of articulation. It's just you couldn't use your context clues to infer what the fuck I was talking about. Look, if you're using your context clues, it's not the case that I will be asking a question about people possessing intuitions and not eat humans. That's just retarded. Look, but when we say trusting intuitions, look, do you not believe it's the case that intuitions can coincidentally point us towards things in which are just morally true or points us towards things in which we morally consider coincidentally, meaning that we can have another determination of morality, but due to the nature of intuition alone, we coincidentally get pointed towards these things. However, the amount of times we get pointed towards these things, you cannot use as a data size because it isn't an adequate enough amount. There's no argument as to why there's an adequate enough amount. You can't prove that. You're just making random claims. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, oh, did you have something to say? Because I'm not done. I could say it after though.
No. You can finish and then I'll take
Yeah.
over.
So when you give your retarded definition of justification, which is any factor which comes in favor of a position, that's completely fine. I can grant that. But that's not motivation. The motivation is derived from the justification, brother. You use the justification for the motivation of the conclusion. So the justification is any factor which infers a conclusion or any factor which comes in favor of a position. You use the motivate or you use the justification as the motivator to believe in the conclusion, retard. So it's just the case that there's an identity relationship between the two in which doesn't exist, but rather a causal relationship usually. Okay? And in introspection, nobody conflated it at all. We just use our priors to determine, usually at least, not in every single scenario, but we just use our priors to determine something, something being the case analytically, or something being the case. We just analyze it, which is fine. Okay? So there's multiple points on this table. Gizbob, maybe you should just stay on mute or something. Yani, please respond if you're done, Archie.
Oh yeah, of course. Sorry, Timmy. What the fuck did you just respond to? When did I say that? You ignore that. I'm not a Nazi. Okay. And listen, the idea is this is. I just want to add a few thoughts to this, right? I mean, it seems that initially Infinity's question at least pointed to why should our intuition be included as some form of justification. Your response to this, Yanni, was saying that you believe any facts that count in favor of the seeming point is justification. This doesn't answer the question. The issue isn't that we're confused on what justification is. We're confused on why a specific, I guess, finding should be counted as a justification for a certain point. Right? This doesn't seem to be answering the question. That just seems to be
Yes.
answering a different question entirely. You also said that we don't use introspection to examine the world, and we examine our own beliefs and come to conclusions regarding that. I mean, I don't disagree, but that doesn't disagree with me either. Obviously, we have to examine our own beliefs to some extent, whether that's subconsciously, whether we're just like having these trusting factors of our beliefs. We're just like, okay, well, yeah, it seems to make sense, right? We don't hyperthink about everything, but we do like still internalize our beliefs regardless to come to conclusions that we eventually learn to trust, right? These form our intuitions towards the world. So I think that's a little silly.
To shortly conclude, the religion point when it comes to the intuitions of not eating humans, look, we can grant that that's trivially true. Yes, most people possess the intuition to not eat humans. Sure, correct. Yes, correct. Yay. But look, it seems to me that all boils down to one's self-interest, whether it's intuitive or intrinsic or instinctual or conscious. But you granting, or I apologize, you not granting the self-interest factor is irrelevant because it just seems to be a case that it's an alternative that we can appeal to in comparison to your ethical view, which doesn't seem to stand currently. I don't see any justification.
Wait, what's my ethical view?
Well, we're just describing what,
Okay.
that exactly, ethical
Retard.
veganism, but we're also just
Veganism,
describing
retard.
what you believe in, right? We don't even
Okay,
have to
are you
answer
guys
specific
done?
titles.
You asked the
Seemingly, if I was
question.
still speaking, no.
You're not. Okay, go on.
You asked the question.
Go.
You
You
thought
asked
you
the
were going to
question.
get us there?
Are you
You
guys
thought you were going to
done?
get us there?
Are you guys done? Hello?
You asked the question.
You
Are you
literally
guys
said
done?
at the start you were an ethical a vegan.
Okay. So it
So I
seems to be
answered
the
your question.
case.
Okay.
Hold on. Shut the fuck up, you retard.
Yo,
You
please
asked
stop
the
When we
question.
have
screaming.
these moral intuitions, right? We take them to be foundational. So we have the intuition first,
You take them to be
and then,
foundational.
bro, why
Let's
is he
stop.
speaking over me? Yo, mute this fucking mutt, bro. What's wrong with them? Fucking niggers, bro. So these intuitions are foundational. We have the intuition first, and then we go ahead and then we provide a normative theory that seems to be consistent with our intuitions to determine what's right or wrong. You see this all the time in ethical debates. I don't know why you're trying to sprint away and right. You're a fucking retard. You start off with the intuition, and then you bring up the normative view, or you bring up some ethical standard to see what corresponds and fits best with the intuition. Number two, would you question my intuition that tells me child rape is immoral? Are you gonna like sit here and ask, oh yeah, Yanni, you have this intuition that child rape is immoral. Why does that intuition then justify you to believe that child rape is immoral? It seems like most people, when they have these intuitions that, I'm gonna repeat myself for the last time here, that have these intuitions that correspond with that describe, you know, abhorrent acts to be abhorrent. We then look for something else to then correspond or be consistent with the intuition when we evaluate our moral views. Do you have a response to that point specifically? First of all, yes or no? Yes or no? It's a yes or no question.
Look, I'm sorry. I'm not going to
No,
be
the
answering
answer
yes
is
or
no.
no's
They have
without
no
elaborating.
response.
So,
Hold on.
Sakazuki, can I answer the
Wait, hold on,
question real
Saki.
quick,
I said yes or no.
Sakazuki?
I said yes or
I'm
no
sorry, a
question. Yo,
question was
Sakazuki, mute
asked.
them,
I'm
mute them,
sorry,
mute them.
Sakazuki, a
Mute
question
them,
was
mute them,
asked.
mute
I'm
them.
sorry,
I said
Sakazuki,
it's
a
a yes or
question
no
was
question.
asked.
Hold on.
I'm sorry, Sakazuki, a question was asked.
Okay, Yanni, bro, you asked him a question, and you didn't say anything after let him respond. You can.
Yeah, thank you. Look, we're not some retards like Shinra. We're not going to answer in a yes or no. So just to clarify real quick, the answer to the question, look, when we say moral intuitions, look, it can be the case that due to the nature of a human, we start off with assessing situations via our intuition. Even though I don't even think that's true, that can be fine. I can grant that hypothetically. But is that relevant? No. We can start off with an irrational gauge. We can start off with an irrational or incorrect system of determination when it comes to a situation. Or we can start off with an irrational gauge and then try to model a consistent normative ethical view or some type of ethical view off of the intuition. But the intuition there doesn't have to be fundamental and it doesn't have to be actual valid justification. Maybe you weren't listening, but I separate justification and motivation. So the intuition can be a motivator towards a view. But is it justification? No. Why? Because they're analytically distinct. The same as you can have P1, which is D1 is a good debater, P2, Archi is an ass debater, conclusion X. Now, the reasons don't have to infer the conclusion, or the reasons don't have to justify the conclusion. It doesn't have to be valid. However, you can still be motivated by the set of premises to believe in the conclusion, meaning that obviously justification and motivation are distinct. The fuck? Anyways, it's just the case that we can have intuitions in which we believe to guide us towards things. But for example, with the rape situation that you asked, I wouldn't question your intuition, but why am I not questioning your intuition? Not because it's your intuition, but rather the concepts of your intuition. I believe I can morally justify the impermissibility of rape. Therefore, I'm not going to question your intuition in a normal conversation if I'm speaking with a layman's. But if we get into a philosophical conversation, I would say, wow, rape is morally impermissible. But I disagree with your reason as to why it's morally impermissible. I don't think intuition is a moral justifier. I believe I believe it's a moral motivation or a moral motivator, which is distinct, obviously, under my view. So, in sum, the answer to your question is no, no. I wouldn't question your intuition to not rape someone if that were to be your moral motivation. But I would question your intuition to rape someone or to not rape someone if that was your moral justification. And I would present another way to morally justify the impermissibility of rape. Retard. So, Archie, did you have an external answer or critique to his question?
Actually, I did. It was gonna just piggyback off of what you said and be quite short, but yeah, like this set for you to try to disingenuously ask whether we would question this intuition. I think the question is completely useless, right? Because obviously, because it's child rape, we're both going to say that, yeah, we don't do that. But in regards to any other, specific set of actions that lead to different sets of consequences, obviously this is going to differ. To question someone's logic doesn't mean you disagree with them or even agree with them. It merely just means that we're curious about the motivations of why you got there so we can determine whether this is a good motivation or a bad motivation, right? So you can go
Yeah,
if you would.
so they're yet to give a definition of motivation first of all, right? So I'm using motivation in my own way. If you want to give your definition of motivation after I'm done or after me and Gizbob are done speaking, then you can go ahead and do that. So with this guy just conceded on the position that moral intuitions are foundational, right? Because he agreed that you begin with the intuition. So the foundation there would be the intuition. But I'll give some type of motivation, justification for you to believe, or that would motivate you into believing that moral intuitions do justify moral propositions or moral claims. So we have these like natural facts, right, about certain specific moral situations. So, for example, if we see Archie or Archimedes extorting a girl, which he's done in the past, by the way, if we see Archimedes extorting a girl, and then we look at the girl and we see her crying and we see her cutting and slitting her wrists, we're like, wait, she's in pain. She's crying, all these natural facts about the situation. But obviously, from the natural facts alone, we can't say that, oh, yeah, well, this is wrong. What seems to bridge the gap between the morality part and the natural part is the intuition itself. Oh yeah, these natural facts about the situation exist. I see the girl that Archie made cut herself, crying. I see her in pain and I see her suffering. And then I have an intuition about certain things like pain and suffering that then tells me that the action Archie did to her is immoral. Nice one. Gizbob, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to speak into reference to what Infinity said earlier, he seemed to be a little bit confused as to what I was asking him. Obviously, I would grant that we have intuitions in favor of not eating people. It's more so to speak in reference to, do you know why we create this sort of distinction in our minds, or is the basis purely intuitional? Because if it is purely intuitional, there's a lot of issues with that, even granted the stuff that you did argue. So if you can answer that, that'd be great.
Yeah, this nigga's retarded. Look, in the situation you gave, you're just presupposing intuition being a justification. Why is it not the case that we can just use an alternative normative ethical view or any type of ethical view to invoke language of immorality or morality of the situation? Is it not the case that, for example, this is just an example, by the way, Void, when you're listening, look, is it not the case that we can apply an ethical ego as individual, specifically an ethical egoist perspective, and say that, well, obviously this female or this person that's quote unquote being extorted possesses a self-interest and not have their self-interest imposed on. Therefore, it's immoral. Okay, that's completely fine. I don't see what's the problem with using other views to invoke language of immorality in situations such as that. Now, another thing is us agreeing that intuitions can, in certain situations, not all situations, I won't even grant in most situations, but just because we grant that in some situations we begin with intuitions due to the nature of a human and just the irrationality of our instincts, doesn't mean I believe it's fundamental or foundational. Fundamental means it's the basis that we're using to build up a consistent framework or attempted consistent framework. However, the beginning doesn't mean it's to build off of. So we can begin with X, but model Y and C off of something independent of X. So meaning we can begin with X. So let's say I have an intuition about a situation that's happening in front of me. A building is falling onto a person. I have the instincts and the intuition to not save them because I'm in a rush. But I can then pause, stop, think about the situation, ignore my intuition, and build up my moral framework. What do I morally consider? Oh, I morally consider the avoidance of suffering. Okay, then I have to save this dude. I ought to save this dude in front of me. Meaning that, sure, in that situation, we begin with intuition, but that's not what's foundationalizing our moral system. That's not what our moral system is built upon. Therefore, it's not fundamental, retard. The beginning of a system, I apologize. The beginning of something doesn't mean that the system that comes after is foundational or is going to be built upon the intuition. That's just a fallacy. That's fallacious as fuck. I have more to add, but look, you can go ahead, Archie. I'll
Of
finish when you're
course.
done.
Wonderful. Now, there's a few main issues about what you're saying, right? Now, obviously, if you say, oh, yeah, I mean, we have natural facts about moral situations. I mean, if we see Archie forcing a girl to slit her wrist or extorting her, that from these end facts that we can't say whether it's good or not. We only know this because of our intuitions. Well, here's this, right? If we see Yani running off with a bunch of Somali pirates chasing a young girl because she refused to give him her number, right? And he's threatening, hey, I'll cut your heart. I'll eat your heart out. Do you understand? If someone were to go to this situation, if you were to have a police officer or just anyone as a bystander, and we see this and we're just like, hey, that's not good. We wouldn't just say this because of our intuitions. I mean, we could, right? But if we were to say that because of our intuitions, we only know that this is bad, right? There's a few issues here. Okay? The problem with your sentence is that when we say we only understand this because of our intuitions, this assumes our intuitions are a valid, unquestionable source of moral truth, and that they somehow fill this gap, as if maybe we'll call it an is-ought gap without justification, and that's obviously a flaw, right? I mean, you're correctly saying that facts alone don't tell us what's right or wrong to some people, right? But when you're inserting intuitions as if they do bridge this gap, this isn't exactly explaining why or how intuitions give us this moral knowledge. You're just begging the question and assuming that they do provide this truth and that intuitions do have to be reliable, because what else would be? This is useless. Okay?
Yeah.
This isn't an argument. This isn't a response. This is you disengaging from the question. So I'd like you to answer, please, and thank you.
So, and before you do that, so about the situation you gave, it's just a case that we can use natural facts, which are features of the world, and then apply our moral system to it, independent of intuition. And there's no problem with that, seemingly. You've yet to point out the reductio or problem to that. And then I feel bad for y'all because y'all probably thought we couldn't track. You were probably betting on this. But to respond to the points that you made before you asked the question, and then you guys went on mute so we could answer the question because you thought we forgot about that, definitely. Look, brother, what's the argument as to why intuitions are foundational? Justify that being a rational thing, okay? Meaning that intuitions are the first thing we can begin with when it comes to analyzing a situation or assessing a situation. Does that mean it's a rational thing to do? I don't think so. So what's the argument for that? And then look, you using a situation which is a datum. Let's say there's a datum there, okay? Is that enough to infer the likelihood or the credibility of intuitions? No. We can have intuitions in which are paired with a desire, a will, or something along the lines of that point towards something which is truly morally impermissible relatively to whatever moral system we're talking about, coincidentally. Meaning that we can have the intuition that rape is wrong, and then rape coincidentally actually be wrong. Because of why? Not because of intuition, but rather because of a moral system which is consistent and or true, depending on your view. So I don't care about you pointing out random situations or a random number or quantity of situations to infer the credibility of intuitions as a whole, but rather, I can say that in some scenarios, and this is a correct response, this is a fine response. I don't see the problem with this. I can say that in some scenarios, our intuitions happen to be correct when it comes to moral credence, or happens to be correct when it comes to situations, determining or assessing the morality of situations. But is it because of the intuition that's had or held? No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. So I'm going to ask, and you're going to say, ask. I don't care. I'm going to ask the question, bitch. What's the fucking argument you can give, retard? The fuck? And also, Gizbob, look, brother, it's just the case that I don't need to point out the reason as to why, or I apologize, the feature in which is possessed by the animal, but that's not possessed by the human. It just seems to be the case that we have motivation. So not justification, but motivation, intuitively at least. We have motivation using our intuition that there exists a distinction between a human and the animal, or we just don't care, which is fine. But it just seems to be the case that there is motivation which is possessed by us that determines the distinction between humans and animals. Just because I'm not able to point it out potentially, which I can, by the way, if we get to that point, but just because I'm not able to point it out, quote unquote, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We obviously eat human. I apologize. I don't know why I did that again. We obviously eat animals, but we don't eat humans. So there seems to be the case that there is a distinction that we make. Oh yeah, this nigga
You
is
guys done? You
retarded.
guys done?
Also, now you're using intuition. This nigga is oh my god.
No, that is not what I said. But okay, look,
What? Not you,
mute them up.
dumbass.
Wait, mute them up. Okay, so I'm not sure if everyone in the audience caught that, but Archie just made like maybe one of the worst blunders in this debate. So he recognized the kind of argument that I'm using is one that tries to say that my proposition best explains the data, regarding as to why we believe that moral fact, my bad, why we believe in certain moral propositions, right? Or how we assess them. And he realized that I'm saying, well, okay, it seems like intuition is the thing that best accounts for this. But then he goes on to discount every single abductive argument ever to say, well, man, that's question begging, man. Bro, I'm a nigger and that's question begging because I'm a nigger that makes girls cut themselves. Like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Archie's a complete fucking retard. But this is like completely fucking wonderful. I'll clarify this point to infinity as well. The argument was presented already. It's an abductive argument. Now, next, you can try to use normative systems, right? To like go ahead and try justify your ethics without intuition somehow. But you do realize self-interest, your normative system being ethical egoism, which relies on self-interest. Self-interest is a natural fact. The thing in question is what brings or what bridges the gap between this natural fact and the morality of a certain situation. You can say, well, the girl that Archie made cut herself had the self-interest, to not be in pain and had the self-interest to not suffer. That's perfectly fine. That's a natural fact. I'm asking you what explains the morality of the situation given the natural facts. We have the natural facts, but what makes us feel as if there is wrongdoing going on? You can't just appeal back to self-interest because that's the natural gap. My bad. That's the natural fucking fact, you fucking nigger. Gizbob, do you have like anything to say?
Yeah, just to speak in reference to his response, obviously I did not ask you that question to imply that you can't point out the distinction, which I know you very well think you can. The issue then is going to be that you yourself take issue with using intuitions as justification. Obviously, you said they are not justification, they are purely motivation. And I take that motivation to be flawed in nature. If we look at just history itself, there are cases where our intuitions pointed in favor of things such as slavery, which now we take to
You
be
do
immoral.
realize you're going against
Very,
Yanni's argument, right?
no. You didn't even let me finish. I don't know why you cut me off. That was really, really bad. But any fucking ways, upon reflection and looking at things in perspective of any sort of moral view that is to be consistent, is to be some sort of justification, then we make changes to these sorts of intuitions. So for you to say that, oh, intuitions point in favor of us eating humans, is just to say that you maybe have not reflected on this thing enough.
And also, I was going to add as well, Infinity with his like fucking retarded remarks. I asked you multiple times already, you fucking nigger, what do you take motivation to be? And he failed to define motivation, right? So I'm gonna keep using motivation in my own sense of the word. Number two, you said rational, right? You said, oh man, you can just be irrational when evaluating your moral beliefs, man, or like whatever the fuck he's talking about. Well, I need to know what you mean when you say rational or irrational. That's the second question I'm going to ask you. And for the third thing, I'll clarify what I take rational to be. So that's like what I take rational to be, or what I take a rational person to be, is somebody who acts within reason. If it's the case that there is no moral distinction between humans and animals, then morally speaking, we have no reason to say that eating humans is immoral, but eating animals is moral. So you can go ahead and respond, Rizal.
Of course. So
Also,
basically,
wait. One more
no,
thing as
there
well
is
before
no way.
before I
No,
finish. By the
please
way,
mute him. Can someone please moderate? Can someone please moderate? Because I see my partner right now is muted for some reason, but for some reason me
Okay,
and Yanni
one more
isn't.
thing.
wait. Like, I think like you guys have spoken a lot. Just let him say his thing, and then y'all can.
Okay, yeah. One more question for the Infinity retard. Can you go ahead and define foundational for the audience? All right, that's the last one.
So
also,
said,
wait, one thing,
Oh,
Archie.
gotcha.
I just want to ask you.
Go
I'm
ahead.
asking because
Has a
of the
judge
time.
for clarification?
I'm
Yeah,
asking,
go ask.
No, it's not that. I'm asking for time limit because what are you guys doing? The usual 45, or what are you guys doing?
Well, what is your debate format that you devised?
It's usually 45 minutes. I'm just asking.
Gotcha. So probably 45.
Whatever gives us the last response, bro.
All right. So there's only 5 minutes left then. All right.
Okay, that's completely fine. So I'll respond to
this.
this for a second. Right. Obviously, this is a retarded point that you made in reference to abduction. So let's explain. First off, let's explain to the chat what even is abduction. Okay, abduction is just saying that X is the best explanation of the observed facts, so X is probably true. Okay, so obviously in your context, people observed, or this observation is that people have strong moral reactions. And the explanation offered is that intuitions explain our ability to make these moral judgments. Therefore, intuitions have to be this reliable guide to moral knowledge, or at least the best available explanation for how we explain this moral wrongness. This is very retarded. Okay, this doesn't counter my explanation, and I'm going to explain why. Okay, does abduction actually work in this instance? We could obviously go under, under determination, which is that there just may be better explanations for moral intuitions. Obviously, evolutionary psychology, that intuitions are survival-based, not truth tracking. We could talk about social conditioning. Intuitions reflect cultural norms, not not moral facts, right? At least under my view. And obviously, we could talk about, emotional heuristics. But the route I want to approach this is more so this. Even if intuitions explain behavior, that doesn't mean that they provide this quote-unquote justified belief. I mean, the leap from intuitions explain how we think about morality to intuitions tell us what's morally true, this still needs epistemic defense. This doesn't seem to engage with the question. This doesn't seem to answer. More so, it really just seems like your argument was, because I disagree, I'm retarded. And, I don't know to anyone else, but that's not a very attractive argument to me. So your use of abduction, it's quite useless, and it's something that's, I guess, basic, right? Even if we were to accept this doesn't really engage, but we can let infinity dispose of you guys.
So one, your question begging with the intuition shit. Secondly, your opponent, I apologize. I said opponent because he just went against your own fucking beliefs, retard. But your teammate Gizbob just went against your own set of beliefs when it comes to his intuitive argument. Thirdly, with the intuition point, retard, I'm using intuitive motivation distinctly from intuitive justification. Now, I just take justification to be what you said. I can at least grant that. I granted that already. But justification is going to be distinct from motivation because within justification, the concepts included a fact in which infers a conclusion, while motivation is just going to be guidance towards the conclusion, meaning that it doesn't have to be a fact, retard. So it's just the case that you can have motivation, which is non-factual, but from what you have epistemological access to, you can consider it a fact or mistake it for a fact. So you have guidance towards a conclusion or belief. So you can have, for example, a justification which is supposed to have or contain a fact that infers a conclusion, and you can use that justification as motivation for something. Or in other words, what I'm doing here is saying that people, not saying it's fine to do so, but people all the time use intuition as motivation. But when you say whether it's a valid form of justification, Archie, do you see an argument for that? Because it seems to be a question back to me. Look, I'm going to finish with the other points, and then we're going to conclude due to the time limit. You're asking me what bridges the gap, but that presupposes my position is incorrect. Why? Because if it's the case, which I don't even grant, but let's say it is the case, if it's the case that self-interest is going to be a natural feature, a natural fact there, I don't see the problem with just saying that we can debate, we can base our determination of morality off of the natural fact in which exists. You can't point out the problem. So it would just be, under my view, we have or possess a self-interest, and that self-interest would be, because Void, you're the judge. You already know my view when it comes to egoism. But we just possess a self-interest, which you consider a natural fact or a natural feature of the world or a natural feature of a human, and then we can determine in the future our morality off of our self-interest. Now, when I say we can, I'm just saying individualistically speaking, one person can have a self-interest, and we can say it's moral for them to attempt to actualize their self-interest in comparison to another person who has a self-interest. We can say that it's moral for them to attempt to actualize their self-interest. You have yet to point out any flaw when it comes to that alternative, rather than just be vegan under the ethics that you provided. You've yet to explain the actual argument for intuition being a valid form of justification, rather than just a motivator that we sometimes use, retard. The
Also,
fuck?
Infinity, for just for a second. Also, I just wanted to clarify. I also made note. Yani also refused to define motivation earlier when asked previously. So his critique towards Infinity, Infinity did define it, but he just didn't listen. But his critique towards his mistake in thinking that Infinity didn't clarify it, it doesn't seemingly mean anything because he didn't clarify either. So,
Yeah. So
I think
just
we
to finish
both
real quick.
require that.
Yeah, just to finish real quick, so they don't try to miscommunicate our points to the audience again for some type of rhetorical upscale. Just to be clear, what fundamental means is to be a forming, or I apologize. Fundamental means it's a foundation or basis towards the system or some type of sensor. So here, when you say it's fundamental towards something, you're just saying it's a necessary base or a necessary feature for a system or object. In this case, it would be morality. If you were to say that intuition is fundamental when it comes to deciding morality, that just means that intuition is a necessary base when it comes to determination of what's moral and what's immoral. Obviously, that's just trivially true. Now,
Are you
rationality.
done?
Look, no, I'm not done, by the way.
Okay,
But
okay.
when we talk about rationality, retard, all I was talking about there was that's completely fine. If we use our intuitions at the beginning when it comes to assessing situations, the morality of situations, or the reasonability of situations, I can just say that we have irrationality, or we have an irrational nature, which just means not, or I apologize, which means not guided by logic or not guided by reason. Which that would just be true because I don't think intuition is reason. So in a situation where we use intuition, I don't believe that we're guided by logic there. And if you were to say intuition is something that's guided by logic, well, that's just conventionally something that we don't agree with. So I'm going to need the empirics, or I'm going to need the argument for that, which you can't get because it's just not true. It's analytically impossible. They're distinct analytically. So in the case of, for example, I'm going to refer back to the example I gave initially. In the case where there's a building falling on a person and I'm in front of it, I can have the intuition to go to work because I'm almost late to work. If I stop that, I'm guaranteed late to work and I'm going to lose my job. We can have the intuition to that. But I can then think of, meaning directly after, I can then think of my moral system and how, in regards to my moral system, it will be irrational to not act upon the interest to save that person just due to what my moral system alone is. So analytically, it would be irrational for us to use our intuition as a foundation in that instance, at least relatively. Okay? So we can conclude, like, this nigga's retarded. The fuck?
They're gonna
Bitch.
get some extra time to speak, I guess.
Oh, okay, then we're gonna get
Okay,
some
yeah.
extra time to
So
speak to as well then.
Okay.
like this guy tried to time waste, and he's like huffing and puffing, and he's out of breath, and like his
Because
efforts are
I'm
fucking vain. They
playing
count for
basketball.
nothing. Wonderful. So Gizbob, do you want to go first, or should I go first?
Oh, yeah. Just to speak in reference to the dumb shit that Infinity said, obviously what I'm arguing is not running counter to the arguments that Yani is making. It's just to point out that even under your understanding of what actually justifies a moral belief, you haven't actually made an argument as to why we do favor humans over animals. Very, very fucking simply. Your only sort of justification that you gave was intuitive in nature, which you take not to be any sort of justification. You didn't make a fucking argument. Very, very simple. Go ahead, Yani.
And then for the retarded points that in fact, I'll attack them in like the most random order possible. Why not? It's the last response. So I asked Infinity for a definition of rational, and he said, the person can just be rational for reasons, man. For reasons, bro. He's like, he never gave the definition of rational that I was asking and inquiring for. So this guy's a retard on that count. Number two, it's expected. This is Archie. It's expected that Oh, okay. Basically, I called Infinity a retard, because I asked him for a definition of rational and he didn't provide the definition of rational that I was asking him for. But he then said that, like, oh, yeah, these people are rational, repeating his point again. But I don't really care about that because, he hasn't justified that position. And then number two, to respond to what Archie was talking about. So, Archie, it's expected that the people. Oh my God, hold on. There we go. It's
It's okay.
expected
Take your
that.
time.
I will take my time, actually, yeah. It's expected to say that. It's expected that the moral facts will align with consensus moral behavior, right? So if it's the case that our intuitions, my bad, if it's the case that what best explains moral behavior is our intuitions, right? And what best explains my bad, what best explains moral systems is our intuition. And then, like, let's just say hypothetically, somewhat like let's just say, morality isn't constructed by humans somehow, right? Even if I were to grant that position, which I don't necessarily grant, it's expected, in my view, that these moral facts would also like correspond with what people take, or like, or what people how people speak about morality and like what moral behavior exists. And then for Infinity's point, the whole debate, I don't know if you can track implicit claims or not, but throughout the whole debate, it was in question implicitly whether or not you could derive natural facts, my bad, moral facts from natural facts. The fact is that I'm trying to explain how, you can derive moral facts from natural facts through intuition, right? Me giving that explanation is me implicitly saying that you cannot, or it seems to be the case, that you cannot justify moral facts with natural facts alone. Like, there's nothing that bridges that gap aside from intuition, which seems to be the best explanation for that. Okay. Gizbob, do you have anything to add before I continue?
Uh, Not much beyond that. I mean, there was like the very obvious sort of concessions where these guys were saying that intuitions are foundational when directly arguing against your idea that they are not foundational. They're really that sort of stuff. The very
We
obvious
responded to
blunders,
that
but
5 minutes
nothing beyond
ago.
that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
do think
With
you
that, by the
responded to it,
way,
but then
You
you
should tell
proceeded to
C to
speak
update
again.
your script.
if you wait, why is he speaking? Why
Yeah,
is
I
the
don't
nigger speaking?
know
So
who told him it was a
Well,
good idea,
yeah.
but
What Infinity used in one of his earlier points, verbatim, was like, "Well, yeah, man, they can use it as a base, bro. They can literally use that as a base, man." And then he went on to define intuition as foundational or foundations as bases, right? And obviously, like, let's think very clearly, okay? Can you go below a base? No, you cannot. So the whole question of you asking me to justify intuitions being foundational doesn't even make sense to me in the first place. There's nothing prior towards the intuitions. It's foundational. It's what you start off with. But I think that's like all of the points that we had to respond to. Take that as a conclusion as well, maybe. I'm not sure.
Look, I ain't gonna lie, bro. These niggas can't track for
What if
shit. I never at all said it was gonna be taken as the base, retard. I said it can be the thing that you begin with when it comes to assessing a situation. That does not mean it's gonna be the thing that begins your moral system. So you can have or you can have an irrational beginning when it comes to a situation, and then after taking time to think, which I've said 8 times with an example included, by the way, after taking time to think, you can form a moral system in which doesn't even agree with the intuition you gave, meaning that the intuition is incompatible and would not be a base, meaning necessary for the system that you built, morally speaking. So it has to be separate. But beginning does not mean base, retard. You can have one, and then you can have two, and then two can be independent of one. But if one was a base, then two cannot be independent of one. Retard. That's just analytically and trivially true. Now, look, I did define irrationality. I apologize. I did define rationality, and then irrationality is just going to be the opposite of that, retard. If you didn't listen to my definition, that's fine. I'm not repeating it. The judge definitely heard it if he was listening in the recording. And then you say, well, it's implicit. I have a seeming for you not being able to derive moral facts from natural facts. Well, that's the argument that is in question, or that's the claim that's in question. Justify and give actual justification. Don't just repeat the claim, retard. Justify that we cannot derive moral facts from natural facts or moral facts or truths from natural features or situations that are applied to the world or a human's nature. You're just making a claim. I don't care about your seeming. There's no argument for your seeming. That's what's in question, retard. And then we say it's an expected view that moral facts also correspond with how people speak about morality. Well, when you say moral facts, we obviously disagree on what moral facts, I apologize, what determines moral facts. So the determination is what's going to be the point of contention. I can grant that ethical egoism is an alternative when it comes to language invoking morality, but you don't grant that. So what's the argument as to why it's not? Because I believe that most people, and I'm just saying this for my belief, I believe that most people invoke their own self interest when it comes to speaking about morality. But rather, they just don't say it directly, which is why I believe ultimately everyone boils down to ethical egoism. I believe everybody boils down to valuing their self interest, whether it's compatible or not compatible, meaning incompatible. I can have the self interest to protect my family, or I can have the self interest to not witness blood on the streets or murder, and then I can conversate with my brother who also possesses that self interest and have a moral conversation while invoking the subjectivist view when it comes to egoism, and it still be consistent and true. We can also do that about intuitive motivation, but I did give a definition of motivation, which you didn't listen to. And I'm not going to give it again. Why? Because I just want to win. And you didn't listen, even though I gave it twice. So it's just a case that with intuitive justification and listen this time, Gizbob, because you didn't track the first fucking time, retard, when you thought we conceded, retard. It's just a case that people can use, not meaning it's true or not meaning it's rational. People can use intuitive motivation, but intuitive justification is distinct. And both of these things can be wrong. The intuitive justification and intuitive motivation can be wrong. The situation, or 3 situations, 4 situations, 5 situations in which it coincidentally leads to something in which is morally impermissible, depending on the view, doesn't really tell that intuition is credible or that it's likely. It's just the case that we can have intuition in which coincidentally leads into something that is trivially true, morally speaking, or something along the lines of that. So when when I talked about us favoring humans over animals, I was not talking about it being intuitively justified. I was talking about it being intuitively motivated. People have intuitive motivation, meaning it doesn't have to be accurate, but people have intuitive motivation to eat an animal, but not eat a human. Why eat an animal under my view? Well, this is just an example, meaning you don't need to contend this. This is just an example, retard. But, well, eating animals grants me pleasure, and it outweighs the amount of non benefits or the amount of suffering, in my opinion. Therefore, I'm intuitively motivated to eat animals, or even morally motivated to eat animals. So there's 2 things there. Okay. Now let's ask the question. Well, how do you feel about eating humans then? Someone can say, well, eating humans seemingly does not at all provide me any pleasure. Just due to them being of the same race. I mean, what the fuck said nigga said same race? Due to them being the same species. Or due to them sharing features in which are similar to me, even if they don't actually have a distinction between themselves and the animals. It just seems to be the case that they do. Or I have a gut feeling that they do. There's just there's just there's no benefits to eating humans when animals exist, especially when animals exist at that. So I don't think it's moral to eat humans, but I think it's moral to eat animals. And there seems to be an intuitive motivation in which separates the two, even if it's flawed or even if it's wrong. So the expectation that you're talking about, that you're trying to lay on the table currently, just doesn't stand. It doesn't fail. So I'm going to ask you once again, so you
It
don't.
fails.
Yeah. So I want to ask you again, what is the argument? Well, actually, we're going to be concluding right now, I guess. So it seems to be the case that they failed to deliver the argument in which justifies us not being able to use natural facts or features as a determination for morality. I don't see the problem with that. His response to me saying I don't see the problem was, well, you have to justify that. Well, I don't. I'm just proposing an alternative in which hypothetically can be the case. But you have yet to give an argument as to why your side is true and which would defeat the alternative. And it doesn't even need to be an alternative. I could just question this and then give an example, which would be that. Okay, retard?
Okay.
Now, Archie, do you have anything?
Thank you. Actually, I do. There's an interesting response you had said. This is more of outlining when you made the statement, quote, if it's in line, what best explains moral behaviors or intuition. And hypothetically, morality isn't constructed by humans, which you don't grant, but let's imagine it is. That it's expected that these moral facts would be also correspondent with how people speak about morality. Now, right here, you're attempting to combine some weird account of abduction or explanation of this behavior with a hypothetical assumption of objective reality. That's a little weird, but we'll break down what you're saying, what you're actually saying, right? I mean, if you're simply going to say that it's expected that our intuitions match these moral facts, why? Why should we, or why should intuitions track them, right? This not only assumes that this evolution or psychology would shape us to be able to detect these moral truths, if it's just these intuitions at least, not just social norms, but that there's no better explanation for moral language or behavior than like these real independent facts, right? Even if you're, quote unquote, supposed to. So there really is no independent justification for realism. I mean, the confirmation bias is also a little stupid. I mean, saying our intuitions match moral facts is only meaningful if we already know what moral facts are. But since we don't, we infer them from, quote unquote, at least in your logic standpoint, you're just saying we infer them from intuitions. Logically, it's very circular, right? You're saying we should trust these intuitions because they align with moral facts, and that we know what moral facts are in some weird sense because there are intuitions. That's a little weird, right? It's very, very strange. Also, just like that, the hypothetical stacking, I think for you to say, oh, well, even if I weren't to grant this, but I don't, but if morality isn't constructed, you still want to draw some support for this intuitionism based on that assumption. I mean, obviously, it's not a mistake since it's hypothetical, but I think this would also just limit your ability to even give this argument. Because if you're allowed to run these quote unquote each scenarios, right, this conclusion only holds if your assumption about this objective morality force is granted. But since you admit you won't grant them, your claim loses argumentative force regardless. So even then, that's not very attractive to me. But I think that since you guys have nothing else to say, and Infinity has given his entire point, I think
Yeah, can we conclude? Like,
You
bro,
guys asked so much questions in your point. Why would we conclude? Lol. Anyways,
Okay.
the
Gizbob, do
questions
you
that
want
we
to ask?
asked are actually standing questions in which we have.
I don't give a fuck, nigger. Gizbob, do you want to ask? Do you want to like respond to his questions, or do you want to ask your own questions, or like? I can clear the bond if you want, but I'd prefer to go second. Hello.
Yo, what's
All
up?
right.
I was on my dog
Yeah.
out. What's up? What's up? What's up?
Do you wanna go first or second? I'd prefer to go second.
You would prefer to go second?
Yeah, but like if I don't, if you prefer first,
Just
my bad.
you just give all the stuff you know off top. I'll respond, then you go after because I don't have as much to say.
All right,
You
bet.
got it.
So regarding his definition of motivation, right? I already said multiple times, if you don't clearly or clarify if you don't clarify your view and you don't outline your view, right? I'm gonna go ahead and use my own definition of motivation for the purposes of this debate. Okay. Number two, this guy tried to do the most retarded burden flip of all time, right? So I say, well, okay, implicitly, I'm calling into question whether or not, you can infer moral facts from natural facts. And then what this guy does and says, retard, you not being able to infer natural facts from, my bad, moral facts from natural facts is in question, retard. When I'm the one that said, when I'm the one that brought up the thing first, when I'm the one that it came from to begin with. So I don't know where he puts it into question. It's like the most classical textbook example of a fucking burden flip. So this guy's a complete fucking moron for that, right? I don't have to answer the question. If anything, you have to answer the question. Number two, number three, regarding your ethical view, right? Regarding your ethical view, which is ethical egoism, how can you go ahead and show consistency, or how can you go ahead and show societal conditions for certain moral actions? So, for example, how can you say that raping kids is wrong? You might want to say that raping children is wrong relatively, right? But the issue there would be, how do you map that onto most of society? Right. And if it is the case that you want to map it onto most society by saying, well, generally people have these self-interests that correspond with that view, the issue then would be, okay, that self-interest that people have seems to be derived from their intuitions. And if it is derived from their intuitions, I think if most people are posed with the NTT question, they're unable to respond in a way in which matches their intuition with the question. So with the question such that eating humans is immoral and eating animals is moral. But yeah, Gizbob, you can go ahead.
You basically responded to almost everything. It's just again failure to, I guess, respond at all in any way to the fact that Vinny made this sort of point about, oh well, we do take there to be some sort of distinction, but he doesn't actually have an argument for it. Again, I can repeat why if they need me to, but it seems he didn't track it because there was no response at all. So Just to put that out there, absolutely zero motivation in favor of his position, or at least zero justification.
Yeah, Archie, do you want to go first or me?
Yeah, actually, I would. I'm not actually sure why I was muted, even though I didn't speak, because I didn't agree to a talking stick. I feel like people should only be muted if they're interrupting, but that's okay. We'll ignore that incompetence from the moderator, Sakazuki. I don't think you actually addressed anything I said, Yani. I don't really have to address Gizbob because he didn't even attempt to argue with me for obvious reasons. But the idea here, Yani, is that you're using a very, very weak case of abduction. And in this instance, in case of abduction you're using, it fails to answer a lot of questions that are posed. Fails to answer the question of epistemic status, fails to answer the question of underdetermination. And it even fails to account for why these intuitions should move along the course of facts. You're really just being circular here. I mean, if you're going to keep disengaging and not actually answering my question, I think that my interactions with you are done here, unless you have an actual response. That's all I have to say. Just for clarification for the recording. Good?
Yeah, you were done, correct. Just don't want to cut you off before you finish.
Yeah.
Yeah, so look, I don't care about you using your own definitions if you don't believe I clearly outline my view or whatever. As long as your definitions don't adequately respond to the points or adequately justify your points, you will lose. So you can define anything as you want. It would just be either one, the definite fallacy, or two, the definitions in which I already clarified to the recording and the judge because I'm only doing this to win. I don't care about convincing you, retard, because you're not actually a fucking vegan, dumbass bitch. Anyways, I don't care about convincing you. I'm just here for Sakazuki and Void, convincing them as the judges. So I don't really need to outline it a third time or a second time, as long as it's concretely established that I outlined it once. Now, to move on to the other points. You saying I tried to burden flip, that's just not true. You saying it's a textbook burden flip is not true at all. That's just a claim there. So it's just the case that we actually asked the I'm sorry, can y'all please mute him? I don't think I was done. So it's just the case that we asked the question first about the motivation between the gap because we don't believe there is a gap. And then secondly, let's say you ask the question first. Well, simply the debate is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Archie, but I'm pretty sure we also clarified this in the recording. The debate is veganism, and we're going to be critiquing your view. And I believe your view to possess assumptions, specifically unwarranted assumptions. So let's say I fail. Like, let's say I try to give an argument and I completely fail. I get destroyed. I completely lose the argument as to why there is. I apologize. There isn't a separation. Well, does that mean that my failure is now motivation as to why they are separated? No. So even if I were to fail to answer the question, you're the one affirming veganism. You're the one with the unwarranted assumptions. So due to my failure, nothing happens. It's just simple. We don't have a position other than just critiquing your view. So you would have to give motivation, even independent of our question. You would have to give motivation for the unwarranted assumption, that being the gap between the two. And then the determination of morality off of the natural features or facts. And then let me just clarify, it's just metaphysically and logically possible that we can use moral facts, or I apologize, we can use natural facts or features to determine things morally. I don't see any contradiction logically or metaphysically, or even epistemologically. So you just questioning things in which are irrelevant doesn't do anything for you, brother. And then when you say, well, map onto society, I don't think it needs to map onto society. So it's just a case that it can explain things consistently, but it doesn't have to have one self-interest in which maps on to everybody else's within societies, or which is compatible with everybody else's in society, which this is just clarification. I'm not saying you made this claim, just want to clarify. But the map onto reality point is retarded. As long as there exists an alternative in which may be consistent when it comes to describing moral events, then your point is defeated because there's incompatibility there, which you've yet to explain why the alternative is something which is impossible or not consistent, retard. So you saying that we have intuitions, I grant we have intuitions. You saying we have intuitions in which we can use to justify, or I apologize, motivate things. I agree we have intuitions in which we do use to motivate things. Yup. And then another thing, you saying that we have intuitions in which we use to justify things. Well, I still haven't seen the argument as to why that just wouldn't be irrational justification in that sense, meaning a flawed belief about it being adequate justification. So I don't see why at all the self-interest that people possess needs to be derived from the intuitions That's just another thing that presupposes your view, which we're obviously critiquing. Retard. We can have a self-interest which seemingly isn't derived from the intuition, depending on what the intuition is. I don't even believe intuitions have to correlate to self-interest at all. If anything, it seems to me that our self-interest, our intuition, is something that's depicted or determined off of our intuitive and or conscious self-interest. So it would actually be flipped. But yeah, can we conclude? Like, this is going nowhere.
Yeah, I feel like they're not going to actually respond.
Okay, hold on. We can conclude after this then.
Oh no, we're
That's
responding
fine.
if you're going to make
Yeah.
us
I'm not
respond.
talking to you, by the way. I'm
Look,
talking to the judge, buddy.
that's okay.
But that's fine.
We're
You
just
don't have to.
clarifying. We're also talking to the judge.
Suzuki, we can just put conclusion
No, we're
on
not concluding after
after.
this if he gives a new
I'm not
response.
talking to you, nigger.
That's
We're
fine.
also
I'm talking to
talking
Suzuki.
I'm not
'Cause
talking
I'm
to
not gonna
you.
lie.
bro.
Wait. Oh, look. I mean, if they decide that there are no new points they want to address, then sure. But if there are points they want to address, then they're like low key.
We're
Just going
concluding
back and
after this
forth.
regardless. It doesn't matter anymore. Like after
Yeah,
this
you
point, I'm
are.
gonna give.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
you are. Sure.
okay, yeah. We are. Me and Gizbob. That's what I said. We. Okay.
Okay.
Look. Okay, like
then
you're
go
laughing,
ahead.
but you're losing
But
horribly.
just go ahead.
Yeah, we'll see what the
Archie
judge
is
is.
like the biggest dumb fuck of all time. Look, this guy is like. Have you guys like watched fucking Shinra and Risan versus Yugi and Penny? This guy, I don't know whether to call him Risan or like whether to call him Penny. Like this nigga is like just fucking selling his teammate. So you're confusing the argument that I gave to begin with, right? The abductive argument. The abductive argument is not right an abductive argument for the way in which people use morality or moral language. The abductive argument is an argument that says it's an argument that says what best explains the gap between, or what best explains our ability to infer morality from natural facts is intuition. That's what the argument is for. It's not an argument for or about moral language or the way in which people use it directly. Okay, dumb fuck. Number two, infinity. You're an idiot, bro. That guy's complete. I'm laughing, bro. That guy's an idiot, bro. So with the burden flip point, obviously, in the recording, you might have been the one that expresses the question vocally first directly, but I've been making the claim consistently that it's an implicit question, right? So the question can be inferred from the kinds of things that I was saying in my arguments and in the other questions that I've been asking you. Nice. Okay. Number two. Oh, no, number two. I made this like bundles 5 times. Number three, with the is or gap, I don't need to give motivation directly for the is or gap, right? I will, right? I will, but like I don't need to do that directly because it's an assumption of your position. Your position assumes that there is no is or gap. So when you provide your position as an alternative and it has that assumption buried in, I'm going to call it into question, which is what I did. But the motivation there would be, I'd expect there to be like some kind of like theoretical fact or theoretical reason or reason that bridges natural facts and moral facts, right? But you haven't been able to tell me what this reason is. You haven't been able to explain it. And I expect this reason to be there in the first place, given that there is no gap. Gizbob, you have anything to say?
Yeah, Infinity said that assuming his argument that he made earlier does fail, or he's actually not able to provide any justification for the claim that he made, he says it has no effect on him, which is very, very obviously wrong. Again, I don't know if he was here when we planned the debate or when we started the debate. This is outlined on recording. The position we were told they were holding to is the anti-vegan position, and that is the perspective from which they'll be critiquing us. So granted, they have no justification for their view at all. We have some level of justification. It actually does look quite bad for you guys. Just want to make that clear in case you now want to make some sort of argument instead of skepticizing endlessly.
I ain't like Gizbob. Just stop, bro. Just
Wonderful.
stay in the
Wait, is it
background.
okay if I
I
can
would say
respond to
you
Yanni
should
for a
be
second?
aesthetic appeal, but your PAP is not even aesthetic. Look, Archie,
Wait,
would you
Yanni.
like to start with me, bro?
Or yeah, actually, I would. Actually, this time I'll speak to the retard Gizbob. I'll acknowledge my like forgotten child, right? So Gizbob, listen for a second, okay? I know they've been feeding you scripts within your GC of what to say, but you seriously have to like not just read them, but you have to think about what it applies to. Okay, so fucking retard. What we clarified in the beginning, Gizbob. Okay, we clarified this multiple times for you, just for you, not really for Yanni, but just for you, because I know about how this isn't really your thing. But the idea is, Gizbob, our position, it isn't defending not eating meat. Okay, we're not saying we're not arguing you shouldn't eat meat or or that you should eat meat. That's what I meant. See, we're not arguing you have to eat meat. That's not our position, right? Our position is merely saying we're okay with eating meat. We're okay with eating non-humans contextually, right? Now, you are interrogating us. This is what I said initially. You are interrogating us and you are saying, hey, your position, there's some incompleteness within that. We're going to address that. Your position, there's some weird errors within that. We want to address that. Not the other way around, okay? So I don't want you to keep moving the goalposts. I don't want the goalposts to keep growing like weird, very swampish, like squatty legs and like running around. I don't really like that, okay? That's not my thing. So let's stick to the actual subject. Now I'm gonna local mute you like I've had you local muted already because I don't care about anything you're saying, right? Gizbob. But to Yani, he's deafened, so I'll just say this for the recording. This is perfect. Obviously, in such an instance, what he told me is this: the abductive argument, quote, by the way, isn't for morality or how people use lang. It's an arg that explains, or that best explains, the ability to infer morality from natural facts, from intuitions. It's not about moral language, unquote. So that's very weird because the thing is, he's saying that we don't infer this from natural facts, but now he's saying we do. I think he's terribly confused, right? But let's make the assumption that he didn't mean this. He meant that we infer this from our
Hello? Did he cut out? Was that again?
Yeah, he cut out.
Okay, so look, he cut out. I'm just gonna someone ping him and tell him that he cut out. One, the abduction, the abductive argument in question went circular, retard. You saying that there's an abduction for the gap between natural facts and moral facts determination? Well, that's in question. I went circular. I don't believe your abductive argument is sufficient. In the recording, brother, oh my God. I think you meant to say it's an explicit disagreement. I don't think I understand what an explicit question or an implicative question is. I don't see how questions can be asked implicatively or implicationally. I don't see how that's possible. But even then, look, you asking a question, like I said, is irrelevant because we're not holding to the fact, like Archie just said, we're never saying, or we're not saying it's only moral to eat, or it's moral to eat meat and slobber on meat and suck on meat. Suck on meats. And then also eat animals alongside of that and eat, veganistic products or whatever. We're not saying that at all. That's not the claim that we made. But rather, at least I'm going to be critiquing your views on veganism. And if Archie wants to defend the non-veganistic position, I'll just say
Yo,
it's
my Wi-Fi
abducted.
cut out. Yo, my Wi-Fi fucking cut out.
Yeah, yeah,
What the
yeah,
fuck?
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Wait, could you?
So
Okay,
it just seems to be the case.
go, dude.
Yeah, hold on. It just seems to be the case that ethical egoism is just consistent with society. And if people hold the desire to eat meats, then it would be moral to do so. So that would just be the motivation and the justification for the non-veganistic position, which stands. And in response to the other shit that you gave, brother, you do need to get motivation because your view. By the way, he said he didn't need to get motivation, and then he said, "Well, I'm gonna do it anyways." The reason why he did it is because he knows that he has to get fucking motivation. But it's just true, trivially true, at least. Envy Occam's razor, or not Occam's razor, Hitchens razor. You probably haven't heard that in a while. Hitchens razor. I can dismiss claims made without evidence, without using any evidence, brother. So
Mhm.
it's just the case that your position had unwarranted assumptions. That's why we asked the question. So you trying to say, well, it doesn't have unwarranted assumptions. There's no proof of that. It literally does. Because you're using the fact that you don't believe that there's a distinction between more art. You don't believe that there is a way to draw moral facts from natural facts if they're identical, then that would just be what's in question, retard. The fuck? That would be an assumption, which is what you're basing your moral, ethical, veganistic view off of. So you saying, and then the reason you gave, well, I'd be expecting a theoretical fact or a reason that bridges more on natural facts, but I haven't been able to tell him the reason. One, a lack of a reason on my end, meaning a lack of a presented reason on my end, is not adequate justification for a conclusion, a positive conclusion at that, when it comes to assessing the truth of something. That's just one-on-one a fallacy. That's fallacious. This is basic shit. You know what Hitchens razor and argument from ignorance is? Do you know what those two are, retard? You just committed both. Or you committed an argument for ignorance, and I can just apply Hitchens razor to your point. So, and then our Gizbob, in response to the last point, Infinity said, outlining, blah, blah, blah. Look, yes, I don't need to give an argument as to why non-veganism is true, even though I just did, just to clarify. Void, I don't, because that's not the claim we made. You can look in the beginning of the recording what we clarified. We were saying he can critique our arguments against veganism if we were to give some, but we were mainly supposed to be critiquing their moral view when it comes to veganism, their applied ethical view when it comes to veganism. So yeah, he already agreed to conclude, but wait, hold on. Do you have anything, Archie? Because you cut
Actually,
out
dude.
in the middle.
Yeah, I terribly cut out. For some reason, I forgot that it was a part of Rizhan's plan. He like jumped in my window like with a little boat and just stabbed my Wi-Fi router. But basically, right, the idea is when you say this, or Yani, right, and when you completely concede this position, you're into some weird territory. You're into some weird waters. Because previously you said the abductive argument isn't for morality or how people use slang. It's an argument that best explains the ability to infer morality from natural facts and from intuition, which is not your original position, but you changed it to be that position from your group chat and the script they gave you. That's completely okay. I've already explained why that's very ignorant and that's incomplete. But you later on go ahead to say, quote, I don't need motivation for the is-ought gap because it's an assumption of my position, that my position assumes there's an is-ought gap and that the motivation is that that you'd expect there to be is some fact that bridges this moral and natural gap. You completely ran away from your defense previously because your own personal argument, what you were supposedly is up gap to begin with, right, are supposed to address it. But what argument or what is my position here? Right? What exactly is my position? This is very ignorant because just to be clear here, you're defending the proposition that eating animals is bad in respect to X. I am merely interrogating this. And we're merely saying from here, why is this the case? We're merely asking you. We're asking you for a motivation behind why this is the case.
Yeah,
so you can attempt to try to flip it. You can attempt to make it seem like we are the ones who actually are on the burden here. And you can attempt to make it seem like my position is full of this gap, this incompleteness. But what position do I exactly have? Right? This isn't something you've explained. You've just simply said that what you believe in has this issue, not me, so I don't have to address it. That's ignorant. I'd like you to demonstrate what in my position has this gap. And then also I'd like you to demonstrate what Infinity's position has this gap, right? And then I'd like you to demonstrate exactly why it has this gap. Thank you.
Yeah, so look,
And
they already
then I'd
said
like
they're
you
going
to
to
clarify
conclude.
what you think my position is. Sorry,
Wait,
sorry.
no. The clarification's not needed. They already agreed that they're going to conclude. But look, let me just clarify something to the judge. I already expected them to know my view, but since we discussed with this. But look, let me just clarify something to Sakazuki and Void. Look, by obviously there's no metaphysical motoscope in which is concrete within philosophy, at least the description or definition of a metaphysical motoscope. I'm just taking a metaphysical motoscope to be, or at least, for example, a metaphysical possibility to be something which is compatible with the nature of objects or a scenario or event or an entity. So obviously, if something which is incompatible with the nature of an entity exists, that would be metaphysically impossible. And then obviously it's logically possible because there seems to be case, or at least I have reason to believe it's logically possible because it seems to be the case that there's no inconsistency with the laws of thought. And then for the metaphysical thing, I just say the same thing. There's no incompatibility seemingly with the nature of natural facts. And then non-natural, or I apologize, natural features or facts, and then moral facts and features. There's no incompatibility between their features and how moral facts can be determined off of natural things. So yeah, he already agreed to conclude. We could just conclude there.
I completely agree.
Yeah, can you I guess like
Wait,
since you guys just
I don't really care to give
Wait.
conclusions directly, but if hold up, shut the fuck up, nigger. If Gizbob wants to give his conclusions, he can go ahead and
That's
do
pretty rude.
that. Shut the fuck up, nigger. If
That's pretty rude.
for like the way this judgment works, hold on, nigger. For the way this judgment works, I'm not sure if
Really
Void
dark
wants to
skin, by the
count
way.
in. Shut the fuck up, nigger. New points
We weren't concluding,
that were
retard.
brought up, maybe. But if he does want to count that,
If-
then like,
Why
I feel
wouldn't
like
he count
for
that? That was
nigger,
during
hey,
our
hey,
turn to
nigger, hey,
speak.
nigger, hey,
Why
nigger,
wouldn't he count that?
hey,
That was the
nigger,
argument.
hey, calm down, good nigger, okay, good nigger, right? So I'm not sure if Void wants to count those new points. If Gearsbot wants to conclude, he can go and do that right now.
I don't think there's a need to give broader conclusions, but in that last segment of the debate, there was a very clear tracking error as to what the proposition we were upholding even was, so that creates a lot of issues. But I'll leave that to the judge.
So they don't want to conclude. All right, Infinity and Archie can give a
Look, let me
conclusion then.
clarify real quick. They agreed to conclude after we were done speaking, just to be clear. We were not
Right.
concluding. So when you say, well, I don't know why the judge would account for arguments that are given during the debate, well, that's obviously just autistic. Look, obviously he's going to account for arguments within his judgment that were given during the debate. Now, I agree. If we were concluding, there's no reason to account for new arguments, sure, or new claims, sure. But too bad we were concluding, retard. So look, it's simple. They didn't respond to the point that I made favoring the non-veganistic position, even though we weren't defending non-veganism, but favoring the non-veganistic position in the case where Archie or me made a potential blunder where we said we were going to defend non-veganism, even though we did not make that blunder. So yeah, Void, go ahead. This was a slaughtered. That doesn't make any sense. This was a slaughtered. Like what?
No, I mean, I was just going to say, even then, right, I think this is completely useless. I mean, whatever you guys think that we agreed to, we already clarified within the recording that your job here was to critique our positions and that we would be interrogating you, not interrogating veganism. Okay.
Yeah.
That was the clarification. So I think this is useless. I already clarified in chat specifically where our position is. So I don't think that really matters to me.